Exchange backup and data recovery. These days, the topic of backup and recovery with Exchange, and particularly in the case of mailbox databases, it's something that's not necessarily a single source Microsoft solution anymore. Nearly all of us who have Exchange organizations are going to have some sort of solution, likely from a third party, that we use to do backup and restore for our servers. Now, typically, those solutions will also have in them some sort of supportability for Microsoft Exchange. Today's backup and restore software is going to have some sort of module, some sort of capability that's installed to the individual client that you put on your Exchange server that works with the volume shadow copy service to quiesce Exchange databases and then ultimately pull data off of them. And so this topic of backup and data recovery, when it comes to Exchange, really doesn't have a lot to do with the actual backup and data recovery part. Now, there are some things that you do need to be aware of when you're talking about your Exchange organization, and then also how you'll architect your organization to prepare for backup and data recovery. And I want to spend some time during this nugget talking about how you will do that. First of all, in Exchange 2010, there are some new features that are going to kind of impact how you'll go about putting together backup and recovery. Now, we've talked about some of these before, the idea that there's no more storage groups, and that now the recovery storage group, because there aren't any more storage groups, is now really a recovery database, and how we don't really have streaming backups anymore. We really just use a process of quiescence for the database, that we pause that database, and then we pull off the data from that database using snapshot technology. We also have more databases per server, so we don't really as much have to worry about whether we've got enough database capacity to put a recovery database in place. And most importantly, the fact that our databases are no longer tied to specific Exchange servers. I talked earlier in the mailbox server role section, the nuggets associated with that role, how the databases that you create because of this concept of database availability groups are not really tied to a specific server anymore. You can take a database from server A and more or less just mount it to server B, and that database is going to function. What this creates is this concept of mobility for those databases, that if you lose an Exchange server and if your data is stored somewhere else, you can very easily then move that database to another server, and your client access server role will simply repoint your users to the right location, and more or less the process is relatively easy. So these new backup and recovery features in Exchange 2010 really make that process of the recovery part of backup, quite a bit easier than it used to be. Now, that being said, there are still some backup and recovery of the Exchange roles that you have to be aware of. Now, first and foremost here is, well, what do you need to back up? And I've actually taken a minute here to identify some of the things that you should be aware of that you're going to need to back up on your Exchange servers. Now, you'll see here that I have the mailbox servers first and foremost. And on the mailbox servers, we have obviously the Exchange database files, those EDB files that include the mailboxes and the public folders and things like that. And then also the transaction log files that work with those database files. These are the things that on your mailbox server that you're going to absolutely have to back up, because it's the content of your Exchange. It's the reason why you have the Exchange server in the first place. And so when you have your backup client, make sure you point it to those files so you're backing them up. Now, these three other elements here that I have with a star are your full text indices, your free busy information, and your offline address book. These don't necessarily have to be backed up, because all three of these can be regenerated by the Exchange organization later on. You can regenerate free busy, you can regenerate the OAB, those indexes can all be regenerated. You may put them in your backup just by default. I know a lot of us, when we create our backup scheme, we go ahead and just back up the entire server, but you don't necessarily have to. Now, in the case of hub transport servers, client access servers, and edge transport servers, really these three server roles are not as stateful as the mailbox servers are. You will, if you want to, for the purposes of compliance, need to back up a set of logs on each, your message tracking logs, your protocol logs, your IIS logs on your client access servers, and then your edge transport servers, the protocol logs. But really, these are needed for security reasons and for the reasons of regulatory compliance, more so than really saving any data there. Recall that a hub transport server, its job is to route mail, and if the hub transport server goes down, mail isn't routed, but you can see that there's not a lot of mail that's actually going to be stored on that hub transport server for a very short period of time. Client access servers are more or less completely stateless because all they do is route incoming clients to their correct location, and so there really isn't any data that we have to worry about. Same thing goes for edge transport servers. We're going to have some data that's on there as the email messages are being brought in. They're verified for all of their various policies that we've set, and then we're sent off to a hub transport server. But for the most part, there's not that much data there as well. If you have the need to store these logs, these are the things you're going to have. But in the most part, the recovery process for these other servers is, in a lot of cases, just to simply rebuild the server and move on. That being said here, there is a number of topics that we still do have to talk about with Exchange backup and data recovery. Interestingly enough, when it comes to the Exchange configuration information, most of that configuration information, the vast majority of that information, is actually stored not on the Exchange server, but actually in your Active Directory. And so the setup file on the DVD media includes a Recover Server switch. Back in 2007, it was Recover CMS. Now it's Recover Server. And you can use this Recover Server switch on a replacement server after you've lost a server, same name, and all of that content that's stored, the configuration content that's stored in Active Directory, will be brought down onto that server again if it's of the same name, and then that information will be used to repopulate the information for that Exchange role. Now, this comes in handy if you do lose one of those servers. Again, this has more to do with the non-mailbox server roles, but what this allows you to do is very simply recognize that a server has failed and recover that server by using this setup command and allow it to repopulate. There's going to be some little data in there that you'll have to verify and then recover, but be aware that most of it's going to get recovered for you. Now, the real problem here is obviously your mailboxes and the backup and restore of those individual mailboxes. And one of the things that we want to talk about here is this concept of recovery databases. Now, Exchange has this capacity for creating these special databases. These special databases, they are limited in a number of ways. Now, a recovery database is not designed to be used as a real database and is in fact protected in a number of ways so that it can't be a regular database. All of the client protocol access to a recovery database is going to be blocked. That prevents anyone from inserting mail or removing mail from that messaging system through some sort of client-based access. Right? There's no client MAPI access. There's the mailboxes in a recovery database can't be connected to a user account. The mailbox and system management policies aren't applied. There's no online maintenance. There's no circular logging. There's all of these things that we constantly associate, or we usually associate with a regular database, is not going to be enabled for a recovery database because we only want that recovery database to be available so that you can essentially pull data off of it. Now, there are three more or less ways that you will go about pulling that data off. You're obviously going to go through the process of recovering an individual mailbox, right? You've lost a mailbox, you've got to go recover it, restore the database, grab the mailbox, you're good to go. You may also have the need to recover an individual item. Maybe there's a piece of mail in there that you need to recover based off of its subject, or based off of a keyword somewhere, or based off of who it was sent to. You can do individual item recovery as well. In some extreme cases, you can also do what's called dial tone recovery, which is a process that's been around for a relatively long period of time. And the idea here is when you recognize that something really, really bad has happened and that the recovery is going to take an exceptionally long period of time, you want to provide just a simple dial tone to your users. You want them to have the ability to send and receive mail so that the people that they are doing business with or working with are not seeing that the server is down. They may not have access to all of their old data, all their old mail information, but at least they can send and receive mail for a period of time until you get that mailbox database up and running. Now, this is called a dial tone recovery. We'll talk about that as well. I want to spend just a minute or two here before we jump into the database corruption part and really talk about this whole concept of recovery databases and how you'll actually use them in the interface. To do that, let's actually take a look at our Exchange server, Same Exchange server we've been working with for this entire period of time. This is EX1. We're taking a look at the databases on here. And if you recall, back from when we were talking about the mailbox role, we've created a couple of databases here. Now, these databases here are your mailbox databases. I've got a public folder database here. However, if I need to create a recovery database, just like with some of the other things we've already discovered at this point, the way I do it is from within PowerShell. Now, creating a new recovery database is done using a couple of PowerShell commands, and I'm going to copy in a PowerShell command. I'm not actually going to run some of these commands because these commands can take a period of time to run, and I don't necessarily have data to even show you, but it'll give you an idea for how this process works. Now, you'll see here that I've copied and pasted a command line string into here. This is the new mailbox database command, and I'm creating a recovery database. I'm identifying this specifically as a recovery database, and I'm naming it RDB2. I'm saving it to the server MBX1. In this case, I might want to change that to EX1 Nugget, so that I know that I'm restoring it to a server. If I wanted to, and I had a different server out there, I could change it to a different server. Maybe I build up an Exchange server just for the purposes of doing recoveries. I don't know. But I can actually restore this data or create this recovery database wherever I want. I obviously have to give it a file path as well. And in this case, it's on the C drive for this database, and then a log folder path. This will create that recovery database named RDB2 on the server EX3 Nugget. Once I've created that database, the next step is actually to do things within that database. Right? I want to restore an individual mailbox, or maybe I want to restore an item within a mailbox. Let's assume that I have this database already. Okay, we've created this database. It was called RDB2. One of the ways that we can go about restoring data is to use the restore mailbox command, and identity, gshields, recovery database, RDB2. If there is a mailbox that is in that recovery database, I can then restore that mailbox for the user gshields. Now, there's a step here that I haven't shown you, right? I have created the recovery database. I then need to go and then from my tape backup, actually restore information into that recovery database. Once I've done that, then I can use this restore mailbox command to actually restore the data out of that recovery database into some other location. So again, step 1, create the database. Step 2, restore the data from tape or disk backup. And then step 3, run this restore mailbox command. Now, in a lot of times, the user didn't necessarily want me to restore their entire mailbox. Maybe they wanted just a particular item out of their mailbox. Maybe there's a file, or maybe there's a particular keyword that I want them to do. Let's try this. Restore mailbox. Identity, gshields, recovery database, RDB2. Now, in this case, what I'm looking for are the subject keywords associated with Project X. Maybe this user accidentally deleted some emails, and those emails had to do with this Project X. And what I want to do is I want to focus the types of restore, or the things that I want to restore based on the subject keywords, Project X. Okay, maybe there's some content in there too, where content keywords is equal to Project X, for example. Okay, what this says is that somewhere in the subject line, the words Project X may be available. And also in the message body, the words Project X is going to be available as well. Now, I can also go as far as to tailor this down to just specific folders. I can do include folders backslash inbox, comma, backslash even the calendar if I want. So this will restore just those files or just those emails that are related to Project X because they have the word Project X in the subject line in the message body, and just in the folders inbox and calendar. This goes through the entire process and helps me restore the individual stuff for that user. Now, there are a lot of individual PowerShell commands that you can do to restore individual pieces of data, to restore entire mailboxes, to restore really anything you want. Even bulk restores can be done with PowerShell. Again, I submit that for the most part, most of us are not going to be using these PowerShell commands because most of us have some sort of Exchange solution out there that allows us to restore individual items, individual mailboxes, etc. So there's probably some sort of greater solution out there that you will have. But if you're going to be taking the exam, be aware of this restore mailbox command because you're going to need to know what it is. Now the last thing I wanted to talk about here associated with mailboxes is this idea of a dial tone recovery. And as I mentioned before, a dial tone recovery is the process of creating a temporary mailbox for allowing our users to send and receive email while we're going through the process of actually restoring the real mailbox. Okay, that temporary mailbox, as you see here, can be on the same server or a different server. And what we do is we essentially create a new mailbox database. We use the set mailbox command to rehome those user mailboxes. So essentially, our users are going to log into their Outlook and see absolutely nothing because it's a blank, empty database, but it at least allows them to go through sending and receiving mail. We then go through mounting the database so that clients can access the database and send and receive messages. And then we create our recovery database and restore the information, and we mount and unmount that database, and then essentially swap one database with the other. All right? You can imagine if we go through creating a dial tone database, inside of that database, as the users use that database, they're going to be positioning data in that database associated with their mailbox accounts. Let me show you a little picture about how this is going to occur. Imagine this is our Exchange server here, and this is our production database. And the database dies, right? We have some sort of problem with the database, and it crashes. Well, the restore process for this is going to take a long time, so we actually create that dial tone database here. And the dial tone database then allows the users to go about and send and receive mail. Now, this dial tone database is going to begin filling up as users use it with content. As we go about actually fixing the original database, well, we need to get this content moved up to this other location. This is now our new production database that we've recovered from before. We go through this process, just like we're talking about here in the TechNet article, of then going through the last little bit of recovering the information in the dial tone database and repositioning it back into the recovery database. Now, obviously, this multi-step process is going to involve a lot of extra work on your part because, well, you've got to restore one database and then merge the contents of a second database into a first database. So you probably are not going to go through the entire process of a dial tone restore unless you really know that something bad has occurred. But again, it provides you that capability of getting your users back online for a long enough period of time so that you can fix the problem. Now, the last thing that we absolutely have to talk about here is the real nightmare when it comes to Exchange and Exchange mailbox servers, and that's the idea of database corruption. Over a period of time, an Exchange database is just simply going to develop little things. Very small issues, all right? And we can call it corruption, or we can just call it just the process of making use of an extremely large data set. And over time, that's going to create some sort of problems. Sometimes, a big event may occur that causes a database to corrupt. Maybe you've pulled the power out of your Exchange database server. Right? Maybe the power went out and your UPS didn't work. And whenever the database comes back online, it says, I was shut down dirty, I am corrupt. Well, whenever that occurs, whether it's natural corruption, whether it's some sort of piece of malware, whether it's just corruption that occurs over time, you do have to be prepared for restoring or recovering from a database corruption event. Now remember, a mailbox database, when it's dismounted, is really nothing more than a flat file. Right? We talked about those EDB files. We looked at those EDB files back in a previous nugget. So one of the first things you can do is actually just simply create a flat file copy of that mailbox database and put it somewhere else as sort of a backup. And the reason for this is because when you go through some of these other more brute force approaches to restoring corruption, the way that these tools go about restoring corruption is by simply deleting items that are corrupted. So you may want to have this flat file copy so that you can, verify additional data or go back and try to retrieve at least some of the data after you've gone through and cleaned out the corruption. Now, the first thing that you should probably do, the first step in recovering from database corruption really is to try to move the mailboxes on that database to another server in the local site. If your database is corrupt and you have the capability of mounting the database, go ahead and move those databases to another Exchange server. Exchange will only move the databases or the mailboxes that are not corrupt. Now, your Outlook profiles are going to be changed. The users are going to see a little bit different server, obviously, that they're connecting to. But you will know that the non-corrupted mailboxes are successfully moved over, and you're not going to lose any of that data. Also, this process of moving mailboxes, and we already went through that process, right-click and move the mailbox to another server. This process of moving mailboxes really doesn't take downtime. There's not a lot of downtime associated with it. So you don't have to worry about inconveniencing your users for a long period of time. The reason why I introduced this is because the last little bit down here are these two tools called IsInteg and ESCUtil. These two tools are used to verify the integrity of the database, to verify the consistency of the database, and also to verify the database contents. You typically run IsInteg first, and then you run ESCUtil. Both of these tools will clear out corruption in the database, but they will do so by simply deleting content and reconstructing all of the necessary pointers to make the database happy once again. So you're going to lose data whenever you do this. So it's a solution of last resort. If you can restore from backup and it's not that far away, go down that road because you don't want to do these. The second problem with these two tools is that the types of actions that they're attempting to accomplish take a long time. IsInteg on a database takes about 1 hour to complete for every 10 gigabytes of scanned data. So if you have a 300 gigabyte Exchange database, mail database, it's going to take 30 hours to just start the process. Now, IsInteg is, interestingly enough, the faster of the two utilities, because the second utility, ESCUtil, can take anywhere from 1 hour for every 10 gigs up to 1 hour per gigabyte. Running any of these two tools, you're going to be down for a long, long time before you come back up. So again, if you have other solutions, if you can include database availability groups like we're going to talk about later, if you can include backup and restore utilities, if you can use things like continuous data protection technology through some third party, do those, because this essentially brings you down hard until both of these tools complete. So these are the tools you have to be aware of when it comes to Exchange backup and data recovery. Fairly short nugget at this point, but really what you need to know is that go out and pick up some third-party tool that integrates with your Exchange mailbox servers, that does a great job of backing up the data and presenting that data at an item level, mailbox level, or an entire database level, and use those solutions. When you prepare for the test, be aware of those commands, those PowerShell commands you need to know, because those are what you're going to need to be aware of to do an Exchange-specific restoration. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about Exchange backup and data recovery. We've focused in on what's new and how that really impacts things. We've talked about the backup and recovery of the Exchange roles and how to recover individual databases, and also how to recover from database corruption if that ever occurs. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.